Hi, welcome to Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century. I'm your host, Larry Mendoza, and co-hosting with me is Rob Penzak today.
Hello.
So before we get into the topic of today, I do want to discuss some very important news that are happening in the atheist movement. Today, in Florida, I believe it's Bradford County in Florida, a new atheist display has been unveiled on the courthouse lawn. Now this is great news because this is unprecedented, and it's the first time a county government has allowed any atheist organization to put any kinds of displays, permanent displays. Now the reason why American Atheists decided to do this is because at that same courthouse, a Christian group put up a display of the Ten Commandments, a large display of the Ten Commandments, and American Atheists decided to sue them. So as a settlement, instead of getting rid of the Ten Commandments, what happened was they allowed David Silverman and American Atheists to put up their own display. So in David Silverman's words is, if you can't beat them, join them, right? So this is great news. And our own host, Rick Wingrove, is on site in Florida right now, and he'll bring more of these details next week when we do the show. In other news, I do want to talk about the Creation Museum. I read recently that they're kind of hurting in money right now, and they're losing membership, or they're losing visitors. I think when they first opened up in 2007, they had about 400,000 people coming a year. Now they're down to what, 250,000. So they're drastically losing, and it makes sense because it's a creation museum. Most museums work with new information, have new displays, new things to talk about, but you know. The Creation Museum is that. I mean, it's once you say the story, why bother coming back? Well, why bother going? Period. But anyway, so that's another sad news, and let's hope it keeps going on that trend. Oh, and following on with that is Kent Hovind, who's trying to open up a amusement park that deals with Noah's Ark. They want to have a full-size replica of Noah's Ark. Apparently, that project is also hurting. And in a bit of comic relief, what they're trying to do really is they're trying to sell pieces of wood and pegs and things along those lines to raise money, up to like $500 to $1,500 for a piece of wood. Now,
so if we can get all of our viewers to send in your donation, no.
Yeah, no, please don't send money. I can find many better things to spend that money on. But anyways, and the last piece of news I want to talk about is that this show, Road to Reason, will be going live July 14th. So we'll be live, we'll be streamed on the internet, and we'll be able to take in more phone calls and emails, and people can watch as we go. So now, having gotten rid of some of that housekeeping, I want to introduce the topic of today's show, which is the science of religious belief. Why do we believe? And you know, it kind of plays along a little bit with our last week's show, which we had John Shook on here as a guest, who talked a little bit on atheology and some of the Christian apologetics, and we did touch upon a little bit about neuroscience and a little bit about brain science and belief. So having said that, Rob, why don't you introduce us our wonderful guest today?
All right, well, we do have a great follow-up. Like you said, last week we had John Shook. We talked a little bit about the brain, we talked about neurotheology, and so for today we're going to have author and psychiatrist Dr. Andy Thompson, who wrote Why We Believe in God, a concise guide to the science of faith. So Andy, thank you for coming in from Charlottesville.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. So now to get started, I noticed that you had Richard Dawkins wrote the preface to your book, which was very convenient. We had Sam Harris wrote your cover blurb on the back. And then our own Elizabeth Cornwell was in the advanced praise section and also in the text. So if you need to, want to pay thanks or talk about how they helped get the project started, that's fine. You can do that on your time. What I'd really like to talk about is how did you get God, if you can zoom in on that, or we have to have a picture of this. The eye of God is on your cover. How did you get God to pose for this, and didn't he know what you were going to write?
Actually, that is a brilliant idea of my co-author, Claire Alcofer, who I'd like to thank, because I wouldn't be here today without Claire. And Claire had the idea, and it is a picture of the Helix Nebula taken from the Hubble telescope. And shortly after it was posted, people started writing in saying it was the eye of God. And so it was Claire's idea to use that as the cover. I think it illustrates a couple of things. One, how the human mind can get tricked into misreading things. And then the main thing is obviously the beauty of science, the beauty of what the Hubble telescope has given us.
That's great. Well, we'll get back to a little bit later exactly how the brain is wired up and why we misunderstand things like this. But first, you wrote this book. You had a very interesting non-ivory tower kind of experience that led you to even write this book in the first place. I'd like you to talk a little about your background in that and what you learned looking into terrorism and stuff.
Well, my son Matthew was in the Merrill Lynch building, which was right next to the World Trade Center on 9/11. And his brush with death obviously was frightening. And it led me to, as any parent, to try to control the situation, do something to overcome my helplessness. And I started researching suicide terrorism. And when I delved into it, what I discovered, and this is already 2002, 2003, there was a lot of information out there already, buried mostly in academic journals, about how the human mind generates religious belief. And I was stunned, because here was this evolving psychological science of religious belief, and it was not widely known, and there was no book you could go to that could give you, I think, a concise guide to it. And so I started giving talks, thanks to Richard Dawkins and Elizabeth Cornwell and the people at the Dawkins Foundation. Give a little shout out here to Mike and Susie, Sean Faircloth, who you've had here, Kim, Nick, Niels, all the people of the Dawkins Foundation. And they've been supportive of me, and there were nice films of some talks I gave, and it led ultimately to the idea of a book that people could look at and they could read in an hour, hour and a half. It would be cheap, paperback, electronic initially, and they could look at this and this amazing psychological science and go, wow, and be excited about it and tell other people about it, give people the copy of the book. And since that time, more and more books have come out. And I brought these today just so that viewers could see that right now we have a whole library of books, no matter if you want something simple, something complex, if you want to delve deeply into it. Barnes & Noble now could have a shelf in their bookstores on the new psychological science of religious belief. And I like to think that my book is one contribution in that genre.
Got a question for you, though. You mentioned all these wonderful books that you have stacked here in front of you. And again, you said that they can go from simple to more complex. I think, I started reading your book. I haven't quite finished it, to be honest, but I did read most of it. And I think it's a great primer for people to start if they don't know anything about cognitive neuroscience of religion and things like that. But what book would you recommend besides yours as a starter book for somebody who has no idea about cognitive neuroscience? Has no idea? Mm-hmm. Somebody who's brand new to this.
Well, one of my favorites is Jesse Baring's The Belief Instinct. Mm-hmm. He writes beautifully, has a column in Scientific American Mind, Baring and Mind, and his is a nice introduction. The two main people that have figured this out are anthropologists, Scott Atran and Pascal Boyer. Mm-hmm. And if you want to dig in deeply, their two books, Atran, In God We Trust, Boyer, Religion Explained, mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Those are two of the deeper books. But if someone just wants to start going into it, I think an enjoyable avenue would be Jesse Baring's book, The Belief Instinct.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and I really did think that with your book, this was completely accessible. I think a layperson can really pick this up, spend a couple hours, and have a very good feel for what this is all about.
Well, that was the idea. I mean, I want to whet people's appetites. I want them to have the sort of basic framework so that they can read my book, and they've got it's like they've got the double helix, the basics of the double helix. And then if they want to go deeper, the references are there. I try to point people in various directions, not just to books, but to articles. There's some wonderful neuroimaging studies out now. And so the book is a little primer. You get the basics. I hope you get excited about it, and then you pursue whatever area of it you're interested in.
Now also, you choose to start pretty early where you do a quick review of evolution. So I'd like to know, kind of why you did that. Why do you need to do evolution there? And also, if you can talk about Robert Wright a little bit. You mentioned the
Certainly.
Moral Animal, and how does that play into it?
Certainly. Well, I start with evolution for this simple reason, that evolution is the only workable explanation we have for the design and variety of all life on Earth. what most people don't realize, it is also the only workable explanation we have for the design and architecture of the human mind. Why the human mind is structured the way it is. It's an evolved structure. And the person that introduced me to this was Robert Wright. And he wrote a book back in, I think it was 1996, The Moral Animal, which is a primer on evolutionary psychology, and it uses Darwin's life to illustrate some of the basic tenets of evolutionary psychology. It's a brilliant book. I think it won some awards, and I would recommend his book to anyone interested in evolutionary psychology. And one of the outgrowths of evolutionary psychology and the evolutionary cognitive neurosciences is this understanding of how and why human minds generate religious beliefs.
It's interesting, you mentioned Darwin here. I want to read a quote from your book where you do mention Darwin. Here it says, he would walk with Emma and the children, Emma being his wife, and the children to the church. She and the children would go into the church, and Darwin would continue to walk.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think Darwin's a big example, I think, on a lot of what your book is about, even, you know, how he had troubles even admitting to himself, you know, letting go of his religious beliefs and the implications of his work even. It took him forever to publish his stuff.
Well, Darwin's wife, Emma, was deeply religious.
Mm-hmm.
And he knew that his ideas were ultimately going to be very distressing to her. And what's poignant is that Darwin actually had evolution by natural selection figured out more or less completely in 1839. Mm-hmm. And what survives are a couple of letters from Emma. He had clearly discussed it with Emma in the late 1830s, even probably before they were married. And there are letters of hers to him that survive in which she's distressed.
Yep.
Because he knew the implications of his ideas, she knew the implication, and one of the letters he carried with him all the time, and at the bottom he wrote something to the effect of, "You don't know how many times I've cried over
Mm-hmm.
this." So Darwin's idea came at great personal cost to him.
Mm-hmm.
Right, there is an opportunity cost that we have to realize for trying to step away from religion. We've talked about the clergy project before.
Mm-hmm.
You have people that really dedicated their lives to teaching people the Word of God as they saw it, and then for them to step away really is, you know, difficult. There's a tremendous cost just doing that. And I think, you know, that story with Darwin is a great one to show that. You have a nice quote in here about part of why you wrote the book, probably. Anything that we can do, no matter how small, to loosen fundamentalist religion's grasp on humanity strikes a blow for civilization and boosts the chances for a truly global civil society, and perhaps even for our species' long-term survival. What role do you see, you know, scientists, what do we need to do to get, you know, the average person in the public to understand religion and this belief, you know, everybody needs to rethink things?
Yes, well that's a paraphrase of a quote from the great physicist Steven Weinberg. And I think scientists who are non-believers, I'd like to see more of them come out and be open publicly about it. I think the more we have respected people in science come out, the better. Obviously they have to worry about their funding sources, and it's politically sensitive to do so in probably a lot of universities. But the more I think they can come out, stand out, speak out, I think we'll all be helped.
And I think also, you know, you can approach it necessarily. You know, you don't have to be, you know, anti-religion necessarily when you're spreading the message. I mean, there's ways to do it where scientists can do it where they don't have to. They can protect their funding and things like that. I mean, just going out there, I think, and just talking about evolution, you know, and how the truth, and comparing that with other ideas, I think it's enough of a blow, you know, without having to go out and say, hey, you know, we don't like God, but you know, you have to believe it this way, you know. But there's ways people can do it, I think, as scientists too. You know.
Well, and I think that's what is beautiful about the cognitive neurosciences.
Sure. Yeah.
I think they're accessible, they're understandable because they tap into our everyday, ordinary experience. And when you see that religion basically comes from things that you use every day, every moment that you're awake, and it's just a little bit different combination of these evolved mechanisms in our head. That excites me. I think it's beautiful science.
Yeah, sticking to the facts.
Yeah.
That's all you got to do.
You also had a very nice quote about how the pieces are all in place now. And if you maybe go back to the Jefferson quote that you had of where things stood in terms of understanding why we believe in God and where we are now.
Yeah. Well, I'm from University of Virginia. Jefferson is a god there. But Jefferson was way ahead of his time. And there's a beautiful quote of his that goes like this. On the dogmas of religion, as distinguished from moral principles, all mankind, from the beginning of the world to the present day, have been fighting, quarreling, burning, and torturing one another over abstractions unintelligible to themselves and absolutely beyond the comprehension of the human mind. Jefferson wrote those words in 1816. And what Jefferson did not know was that when he wrote those words in a letter, there was a 7-year-old boy in England who would grow up to change our view on all life on Earth, but also the human mind, and whose revolution, the Darwinian revolution, would give us an understanding of religion. So if Jefferson were alive today, we could say, excuse me, Mr. President, religion is no longer beyond the comprehension of the human mind. We now know how human minds generate and consume these religious beliefs.
Right.
And you could take it even one step further. It's not going to happen probably, but President Obama could hold a press conference and he could say, my fellow Americans, we have now unraveled religion. We now know how human minds generate religious beliefs, why we generate religious beliefs. And I'm proud to say that some of that research some of the confirming research came from our National Institutes of Health.
Right, now you sent us one great study from the NIH, which I want you to talk about.
Certainly.
But first, I want you to tell us, there's that whole branch, complementary and alternative medicine, out of the NIH. We've talked about this before. How devastating is it when the NIH embraces that? How is a layperson to sort things through?
Well, I think it's tragic. I'm a physician, and I was deeply saddened by that. Because there is no such thing as alternative and complementary medicine. There is only evidence-based scientific medicine. And that's what the National Institutes of Health is about and should always be about.
Right. You said you understand the politics, though, that they need their funding, they have to defend it. And so now maybe you can talk about that paper a little bit, what it showed.
Certainly. Well, I think it's wonderful. There's a paper by, the lead author is a man named Kapogiannis, and there are multiple authors. It came out in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, I think in March 2009. The work was done during the Bush administration. And it's the first imaging study we have of a group of people that are just ordinary citizens. A lot of the neuroimaging studies were of monks and nuns, people I think that are outliers. And they did this study. And again, I think it's tremendous. And what they showed was that the mechanisms we use to generate religious beliefs and religious cognition are everyday, ordinary mechanisms that we use for social interaction. It's one of the nicest pieces of neuroimaging evidence we have for how human minds generate religious belief, out of the National Institutes of Health.
Sticking to the facts.
Absolutely.
That's what we got to do.
And just beautiful research. Really, I think ingenious research, and again, it's science at its best.
We talked about, John took that a little bit last week with some of those studies, how the new apologists are now trying, just like they want to claim each piece of science as if it was their own, no matter how hard they fought it originally. They want to look at that new evidence and say, well, if everybody has these cognitive things built into their brains, and their brains are using this stuff to believe in God, it must be because God programmed that into their brain. How do you counter that?
Well, I think there's three basic objections to that. Okay, they're saying that if the human mind is designed this way, then God intended it this way. All right? All of us have the backs. Your lumbar spine is the back, is a quadruped back. All of us have that. Our lumbar spines are the legacy of when we were walking on all fours.
I've got quadruped knees too.
Right, so do I. And it makes us vulnerable to back pain. So the extension will be, well, if our backs are designed that way, God wanted us to have back pain. Well, no. Back pain and back problems are an outgrowth of that design. So I think that dispenses with that, number one. Number two, that these mechanisms that they want to claim are things that make us vulnerable to generate supernatural beliefs. What we now know are the cognitive mechanisms that evolved over eons to solve everyday problems can combine in a way to generate supernatural beliefs. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the second argument I would use. The third is well, actually there's four. Let me do a third. That these people that argue this, they use cell phones, they use computers. Well, the same science that tells us how electrons move in computers and phones is the same science that has verified natural selection, has shown that we are hominids that evolved in Africa. And you can't have it both ways. You know, if you're gonna subscribe to science and its discoveries, you can't cherry pick. Right. There are other things there. And really the fourth thing, which is...
Can I have you hold the fourth for 1 second? We've got somebody, Tom, on the phone from Pennsylvania. We're going to cut him for that, and then we can get back to the fourth thing. Go ahead, Tom.
Yes, Tom. Okay. Go ahead. You can ask your question.
All right, I'm not sure.
I wanted to ask, with the topic about, how minds generate belief, I'm curious to know how this might affect, say, other topics of the supernatural, like ghosts or spirits.
I didn't hear that.
Could you repeat that a little louder? We caught that part. Say that again a little bit louder.
Yeah, sure. I was curious how this might affect other aspects of the supernatural, like
how our cognitive setup affects not just religion but all sorts of supernatural beliefs.
Right.
Okay, that's a great question.
Sure. Good question. Yeah.
The idea of spirits is just one small step from what we do all the time. We think about what's going on in other people's minds, and they don't have to be in front of us. I can think about the questions that you were going to ask me today, last week from Charlottesville. I can think about what's going on in your mind. And you don't have to be present, and so I can think about what are called disembodied minds all the time. It's one of the things that make us unique as a species. We can remember conversations we had with unseen others. We can plan conversations we have with unseen others. And so it's just one small step to imagine a spirit, a ghost, a god, a dead ancestor. That religious beliefs, all supernatural beliefs, pirate everyday ordinary social mechanisms that we use. It's called decoupled cognition, but it's basically a fancy way of saying that I can have a complex social interaction with somebody who's not even present, who's in the future or the past.
Tom, was there any specific belief that you wanted us to address, or just general supernatural kind of beliefs?
Well, it's pretty interesting, the whole concept of imagining these things, but I was dealing with experiences specifically, how that might lead us to a specific belief based upon these experiences, say, of a ghost.
Okay. Yeah, it's funny. At a friend's house last night, they were talking about when they were driving down from the mountains, there was a bunch of mist below, and he thought he saw the face of Jesus. Mm-hmm. And they talked about it as recognizing different patterns, and then later, 6 months later, associated with something that happened in the family. And so after reading your book, I just felt like I had a lot to say of how there's a pattern, so we saw it. Mm-hmm. And then what do you say about there's a 6-month gap between you see a ghost or you see whatever it is, and then your brain, why does it tie it in?
Well, we overread agency, and we overread human agency. We don't see the face of a dog or a cow in the moon. We see the face of a person. We overread human agency.
Well, thank you, Tom, for calling. We have another call on the line, so call back anytime.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right.
Do we have another caller there or no? Okay.
You want me to go back to the fourth?
Yes, if you can go back to the fourth point.
All right. Because this is my favorite, and it comes from Christopher Hitchens. And the idea that our genus shows up 2 million years ago.
You should remind the readers, we're talking about the question of...
The question of that our brains are designed to believe in God. Right. No, our brains are designed to survive on the savannas of Africa. I mean, that's what originally designed our brains, to survive as kin-based groups on the savannas of Africa. And you're going to tell me that, you know, our genus, I mean, we'll just go 2 million years ago. Our genus, 2 million years ago, Homo, evolves in Africa. Small kin-based groups without language. They make it all the way to China, Indonesia. And God is sitting up there just waiting, all right? 2 million years ago. He's waiting and waiting and waiting. So our species comes along maybe 160,000 years ago, modern Homo sapiens. And he's still just up there waiting while people lead short lives, die probably of infectious disease. And then fully modern Homo sapiens, the three of us, we're probably 70,000 years old. And God is still up there just waiting. And finally, 2,000 years ago, he intervenes in the Middle East with a bunch of illiterate nomads, right? and then he decides to reveal himself. Now, mind you, that's 2,000 years ago. 3,000 years ago, the Sumerians had already invented beer, glue, and writing. All right, so you could leave a note to your wife saying, sorry I broke the dish, I glued it together, I'll be back, I'm going to play golf. And you could do that 3,000 years ago, but God intervenes in the Middle East 2,000 years ago. Come on, give me a break.
And thank to the Samaritans for beer, by the way. You know,
yes,
that's
absolutely.
That's one of the things. I believe we have another call on the line. We have Allison from Virginia. Hi, Allison.
Hi, Larry.
How you doing?
Good. How are you all?
Doing well. You got any questions or comments for our guest here?
I do have a question. I'm not sure whether you have addressed this already, but I was wondering whether you could talk about the psychology of the cognitive dissonance that must exist in the minds of these believers, how they accept some scientific truths which contradict their religious beliefs, but they still hold the belief. And it just seems like this would be really uncomfortable, and I'm wondering why they don't feel compelled to just go ahead and reevaluate their belief system.
That's a fabulous question. We see that all the time, the cognitive dissonance between holding beliefs that on some level you know can't possibly be true.
Well, I think, again, it's grounded in everyday ordinary mechanisms. All of us are vulnerable to something called self-deception. All of us put aside inconvenient truths. And it's an ordinary mechanism. And it's you know, that's why our children are the most beautiful children that ever lived. And there's all sorts of things. So we all have capacities for self-deception. And religion, again, just uses that in the extreme. And we can go along holding beliefs that are not true. And religion puts people in a situation where they have to do that, I think, obviously, in the extreme. And people slowly do, I think. And I think we're seeing more of that. People slowly find it intolerable, just lived experience and their day-to-day experiences start to push them away. And I think you're seeing more and more people slowly moving away from being able to bear that self-deception that religion involves.
And what's the answer as a society? How do we get everybody to keep drifting away?
I think it's education. Education, education, education. I think we want to educate particularly children in critical thinking, question everything.
Sure.
And they should, any tenant, the first question out of their mouth should be, show me the evidence.
Allison, did you have any other questions? We're going to go to a public service announcement in a minute. Do you have a last question?
No, that answer. I love that education is the answer. I agree. As a UVA alum.
All right.
Thank you, Allison.
Thank you
much.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
I think we're going to have to take a little public service announcement break for just a couple minutes here, and then we'll be right back for the second half of the show.
Hey, I'm Anderson Cooper. As a parent, you want to make sure that your child knows how to deal with bullying when they see it happening. And chances are they want to help, but they don't really know how. Well, teach them that the best thing to do is calmly walk away, find a teacher or other adult, and speak up. And do your part. Be that adult they can talk to and trust will listen. Join me to help stop bullying. Go to stopbullying.gov to find out more.
Gosh, Darlene, it sure is amazing how much we have in common.
I know, Larry. We both love three-car pileups. We both were built in Buffalo.
And we both know wearing safety belts helps save thousands of lives.
Yeah, this is fascinating.
Don't mind Vince. He's getting over a bad breakup.
I know. Janet's picking up the pieces, too. They're in here.
I wish they understood it's all worth it to get people to buckle up.
Hey, lacerated lovebirds, I sense a major crush.
You could learn a lot from a dummy. Buckle your safety belt.
Talk about head over heels.
Rosita, did you know there's a right way to sneeze? Let's show them in, Luke. Got it. When you feel like your nose needs to give it at you, this is how you act. This is what you do. Lift your arm up high, bend it toward your face. Sneeze right there in the belly place. Achoo! Achoo! You can do it with ease. Achoo! Achoo! That's the right way to sneeze. Thank you.
To learn more about preventing flu, visit flu.gov.
7,000 high school students drop out every school day. That's a line of desks more than 4 miles long. We can keep students in school. Visit boostup.org and take the first step.
So, I just moved in with this family, and it's embarrassing. The little one, he likes to go outside and crawl around in the giant litter box. I don't know what he's doing. I mean, I was born and I knew how to use the litter box. Look at that! That's disgusting! Oh, poop already! You're making me nervous. Oh, okay, I can't look at this anymore. I really hope he grows out of this, for his sake.
All right, we're back. We're joined by Ruben and Coco, who we'll talk about in just a little bit. But we left off, you talked about evolution. When is the right time to start teaching people evolution, and how should we go about that?
Well, I think it ought to be part of the school curriculum. And I think you could start teaching human evolution in elementary school, certainly in high school, middle school, high school. It ought to be part of science. It ought to be part of biology. And it's so amazing. I mean, what we now know about human evolution. There were, I think, just 3 or 4 million years ago, there were 27 different hominids. And there's for instance, anybody that's interested, there's a wonderful new book out there by a man named Chip Walter called Last Ape Standing. It'll give you an up-to-the-date, very accessible overview of human evolution. There's a wonderful exhibit that Richard Potts did at the Museum of Natural History, the Human Origins exhibit. And I think we ought to be teaching that starting certainly in elementary school, absolutely in high school, because it's so amazing. And to think about it, that every one of the 7 billion people on Earth today, all 7 billion of us, are the sons and daughters of somewhere between 600 and 2,000 individuals that arose in Africa 70,000 years ago and survived tremendous climate shift and came out of Africa and populated the world. So we're all Africans. I think that ought to be taught. I mean, and put aside ethnic differences, racial differences, political differences. Underneath our skins, we're all Africans. We're all sons and daughters of those early Homo sapiens in Africa.
Okay, can we put up that risen apes, fallen angels picture just for a second? And yes, I like that idea that we're all the same under the skin.
Yeah, as you said. Yeah, we're all risen apes, not fallen angels. And I think if children start to see that, it's such exciting science, and they get excited about human evolution.
Right, and so are we going to teach that God created all 27 hominids in his form, or what? Do we start teaching the little kids? What's your view of teaching kids that we were fallen angels, and teaching creationism to kids?
I think that religious indoctrination of children is a form of child abuse, and I appreciate that may ring hard on people's ears. But I think that all children, all over the world, have a fundamental human right to be protected from poisonous ideas and religious indoctrination. And there's a wonderful essay out there called What Shall We Tell the Children by Nicholas Humphrey, and he gave it as a plenary address at Amnesty International in 1996. And I think it's posted on edge.org. And you'll understand where I come from if you read that essay. He makes the case. All children should have a fundamental human right to be protected from religious indoctrination.
So how would you respond to people like, I believe it's Dr. Justin Barrett from, I think it's Oxford, who wrote a book, says Born Believers, where he makes the case that all children are born with an innate belief in God. How would you respond to that?
Well, I would love to talk to Justin Barrett, because the reality is that Justin Barrett's first book, Why Should Anyone Believe in God, and his second book, Born Believers, are two of the best books about the cognitive mechanisms that generate religious belief. And you read, for instance, his first book, he lays it all out there, and then at the end, he reveals that he's a believing Christian. It makes utterly no sense, unless he's worried about losing his family. Mm-hmm. And his idea that we're born believers, no. We are born with these cognitive mechanisms which can be used to generate religious belief. But these cognitive mechanisms are the mechanisms that we use to survive as the most exquisite social species ever. Mm-hmm. I was talking about that. We can have imagined conversations with unseen others. Yeah. That's just part of our psychological hardware. That's very easily can be turned into, worshiping a dead ancestor or worshiping a god. So, and Justin Barrett lays out in his book, Born Believers, all those mechanisms which start to show up in childhood. I mean, we now know. There's beautiful research at Yale by Karen Wynn and Paul Bloom. Look at the New York Times Magazine, The Moral Life of Babies. Mm-hmm. And we can now show that babies as young as 3 and 6 months have the capacities to make really moral decisions. They can tell fair from unfair, good from bad, hurt from help. Extraordinary, long before language. Well, those mechanisms are internal, automatic, innate. We're not conscious of them, but religions can come tell us, well, we wouldn't be moral if it weren't for these religious beliefs. And that's just so wrong. But we've got these mechanisms, they're there in childhood, and Justin Barrett is one of the people that lays them out.
And taking that even a step further, as far as morality, I mean, we see moral behavior in animals. I mean,
yes.
Just watch chimps or bonobos or any of the other primates, and you will see, without doubt, that there is absolutely an understanding of fairness, morality, things along those lines.
Yeah, and we're animals.
Yeah.
And there's a book out there called Wild Justice. Anybody's interested in that? The Moral Life of Animals.
Yeah, wonderful.
I like the comparison that you make with fast food analogy for religion, because I think it's very readily identifiable for everybody. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit. And also, my wife is a vegetarian. She doesn't cook with salt, and she can eat 4 M&Ms, then turn her back and walk away. Talk about your fast food comparison, and can she be certified?
I'm not touching that one, the last part. The science, I think, is beautiful, and it's attached to human evolution. All of us have cravings for things that were rare and crucial for our survival. You and I don't crave broccoli because tubers were readily available on the African savannas. You and I crave fat. We crave the fat and the protein of lean game meat. And that was crucial. Compact source of calories, of protein. We also crave sweets because, again, ripe fruit was rare but crucial source of calories and sugar. So we come out of our evolution with these specific cravings, fat and sweets. And then the modern world gives those to us in novel forms that are supernormal stimuli. I mean, I like a peach, but man, I'll go for a brownie because it triggers that supernormal stimulus. And if you understand the psychology of junk food, you understand the psychology of religion. Because, again, ordinary mechanisms and religion creates supernormal stimulus that comes back to us. You have the stuffed animal. One of them is the attachment response. All of us have the basic attachment response. When we're distressed, we turn to a caretaker, originally and usually the parent. and that's just your basic attachment mechanism. And religion gives us a supernormal parent, a supernormal attachment figure. What does your child do, or when when your children were young, a 2-year-old, what does a 2-year-old do when they're distressed? They stumble over to you, and they reach up and they want to be picked up.
You know, maybe you can jump to that next picture while we're talking of the arms upraised. And you can,
right. And what do Pentecostal worshipers do? They reach up and beseech a God, a supernormal parent, much more powerful than our ordinary parents. But that's the attachment response. Again, all religion is based on, the ideas, the beliefs are based on these mechanisms that evolved in us in Africa originally for other purposes. And then religions just pirate them or hijack them and use them to create these supernormal stimuli, just like your junk food. You want to look at your next McDonald's Big Mac meal as a monument to your Stone Age inheritance.
I remember with the like the Pentecostals, Richard Dawkins says that you really help put it in context, that we might look at somebody begging God for help and all that as kind of silly, but now we can see it in its evolutionary context and the need for that attachment and the.
Yeah, it's your basic attachment mechanism.
And it's interesting. You kind of mentioned the fast food and things along those lines as being kind of a byproduct. You know, I mean, it's a
cultural byproduct.
It's a cultural byproduct, and I like to make also when I read that in your book, the analogy of sickle cell anemia in humans. It's a genetic disorder that came about as a byproduct of an evolutionary adaptation to fight off malaria parasites. Right. And you see it on many levels. You see it on a psychological level, these byproducts of evolution, and you see it also on a physical level, things like sickle cell. And it just goes to show that evolution doesn't always pick the absolute best solutions. It picks the solutions that are available. Right. And based on various things. So I think that made when I read that, it really hit home with that.
Right. And evolution has come up with the best solutions possible for how we negotiate our social interactions. That's why we're such a successful species. But those same mechanisms can be used to generate poisonous religious beliefs.
Yeah, and I think the sickle cell, that's a great example, because nobody's going to debate that having sickle cell disease and all that pain and suffering and dying early is good for you, or there's several other enzymatic deficiencies. And so once people understand that, it's easier to explain, well, religion co-opts evolution in the same manner.
In the exact same manner, yeah. And unfortunately, religion has turned out to be pretty detrimental in some cases, as we've seen throughout history. But yeah, no, that's a very interesting concept. This is also goes, a lot of Christians like to debate, atheists or even scientists about, how can you, look at all these bad things, if evolution was real, why aren't we flying, and why don't we see things like the crocoduck, and things along those lines. But it clearly goes to show that it's a fundamental lack of understanding of evolutionary biology and the process, and I think that speaks a lot to scientific literacy in our general population. And I know that there are organizations, and actually we're going to have a host here hopefully soon, who's led a wonderful effort on citizen science and helping to make everyday citizens scientists, because anybody can do it. You don't have to necessarily have a PhD to do science.
No, it's education, education, education. I think we can teach evolution to the young. And let me put a little segue in here that I learned today that I think people interested in me, you'll understand why in a minute, but 1 out of every 4 children in the United States today is Latino, is Hispanic. And they're obviously, many of them still caught up in the Catholic Church. And I think we want to reach that population. They're looking, and the Catholic Church is losing them in hordes. And we want to focus on particularly poor youth, I think, but the Hispanic population, I think we don't appreciate that that's the youth revolution in this country. And I say it because my book has been translated by Lorena Rios, who's here in Northern Virginia.
Yep, she's local.
And David Tamayo, and the Hispanic American Free Thought people, and a shout out to them. But I think we want to reach all the populations, and it's education, education, education.
Right, and you mentioning that these Hispanic children are leaving their Catholic background, and it's interesting to find out why. First of all, of course, when they come here, they probably are exposed to a lot more, and don't think for 1 minute that other denominations don't know what's happening, and that's how they're snatching it up. I think
a lot of them,
they're going to Mormonism. I think
there's Mormonism. There's even Hispanic mosques.
Yeah, Hispanic mosques.
But I think, could you have imagined? But I think think about 1 out of every 4 under the age of 18 in the United States, reportedly Hispanic, and that, we want to reach out to everybody. And again, I think it's education, and it's science education.
And I think it also speaks to, you talk about the things that religion fulfills for people, but you have people that are saying, okay, this is all mythology, I'm walking away from Catholicism, this is silly, but they're not necessarily heading towards secularism. We need to kind of explain that message, that they're going to another religion to fulfill those needs. How do we as a secular community fulfill the needs?
I think that's the task before us, and I think we need to all be thinking about that. I don't have the answer, and I think that's why we need the organizations we have, and that's, my bias, of course, is science education.
Sure.
Now, I see you brought some fruit. Is that for us to snack on? You talked a little bit about we can look at our stuffed reindeer, and I can put a mind into his body and talk to him.
We talked about it earlier that one of the mechanisms that religion utilizes or hijacks is what I was talking about earlier, is this mind-brain split, that we can think about minds disembodied from bodies. And one of the beautiful pieces of science is that that's literally built into the architecture of your brain. So if this is your brain, let's assume this is your brain, and do a little surgery here. If this is your brain, and this is the frontal lobe area, this is the middle medial prefrontal cortex. The medial prefrontal cortex. This is where you process your own thoughts, feelings, wishes, and desires. This is where you process other people's thoughts, wishes, feelings, and desires, all here. But bodies, my ability to process my own body and to process your body, to see where it is, that's all lateral cortex. And so the mind-body split is actually built into the very architecture of the brain. And that allows us to think about other people's thoughts, feelings, wishes, and desires without having the body right here. And you can see where religion utilizes that. That allows us to think of a God. It's actually
easy. It's easy to do. Yeah.
I mean, that's the main thrust of the discoveries, is that religion, as irrational and crazy as it can seem at times, is really just one small step from. It's a different combination of ordinary cognitive mechanisms that are crucial to who we are as social apes.
And just like selective pressures select for certain traits, certainly if you are in an environment where this little step that you take of this belief gets selectively, there's selective pressure for that in family and community, it's going to keep advancing and promoting itself. And I think that's what we've seen and why religions have become so prevalent. And we see them in almost every society, right?
Yeah, because religions were our original cosmology, biology, and group. And they offered us an explanation of the world, and they allowed us to bond together in harsh environments. And so religions were, useful. But I think the evidence is pretty clear. We've long outgrown it. We now understand the origins of the universe. We now understand our origins. And I would submit to you, we don't need religion to have a bonded, cooperative civil society.
Right.
In terms of not believing, now we have the evidence. Maybe you can talk about this paper about cognitive and neural foundations. Is that the right one, with the false tagging? In terms of how you process, like we actually have to learn to deny something.
Oh yeah, well no, thank you. You're the one that sent me the paper. It's a wonderful paper by some people at Iowa, and it's in the journal Neuropsychology, I think in 2012. And what they showed was that people who have damage to this area of the medial prefrontal cortex become much more vulnerable to authoritarianism, fundamentalism, and religious belief. And the question is why? And the reasons appear to be because we tend to believe first, question later. And the part of our brain that doubts, that questions, is in this area. And when it gets damaged, we become more vulnerable to authority. We don't question, we believe, we don't doubt, we don't scrutinize. And so this is sort of, in a sense, the skeptical part of your brain. And it is undeveloped in children because you don't want your 5-year-old, every time you say something, going, show me the evidence. Why do you say that? Why? I mean, they'll do a lot of that, but in the sense of really questioning things. And so this is why education is important. It literally impacts the brain. You want to develop children and adults' abilities to question.
And you talked about indoctrination too, like why this makes kids so vulnerable.
Right, and kids, the Jesuits had a neurologic basis when they would say, give me a child before age 7 and I've got him for life. Because they could inculcate beliefs here. And the other thing we know from Sam Harris, most people think of Sam Harris as a public intellectual and polemicist. He's actually a neuroscientist, and he has a study that shows religious belief is in the same area of the brain as our identity. And so, it's very tied up in who we are. And so if you can get the Jesuits, when they said, give me a child early, they've got him for life. They weren't joking.
Yeah. In terms of being deferential to authority, this toward a little further in your book, Thy Will Be Done, you talk about Stanley Milgram's electric shock experiments, what people will do. Maybe you can review that experiment.
I think part of everybody's education, this is just my bias, part of everybody's education should be to Google Stanley Milgram, M-I-L-G-R-A-M, and pull up the material about his research. He was a psychologist at Yale, and he showed that all of us are much more vulnerable to authority than any of us want to admit. And he set up an experiment where people were told to give shocks to somebody if they got wrong answers on a test. And of course it was sham, and the actor wasn't actually getting electric shocks, but would scream out. And the authority experimenter would tell the person, increase the electricity, increase the electricity. And the people would look and say, do I really? And the person would say, yeah, he got the wrong answer, you've got to shock him. And it's very sobering. And that we are all, the three of us, we're all much more vulnerable to authority than any of us want to accept. And I think, again, everybody should be educated about that kind of as a vaccine. You want to know that part of you. Because it's true of all of us.
Because otherwise, it's easy to fall into self-deception. And in reading that section in your book, there's another quote I want to read to our audience out there, which I thought was wonderful. It said, maybe there are only atheists in foxholes. If the faithfully, truly, and fully believe in a protective deity, why would they dive into a foxhole to protect themselves from bullets whizzing by? I thought that was genius. Yeah. and I go straight to that point.
And I think that's true. I mean, we all are functionally atheists. And we wear seatbelts, we buy health insurance, and if you're on a battlefield and somebody's shooting at you, you get into a foxhole. Yeah. And I would argue, at baseline, we're all functionally atheists.
You also point out that, and we want to make sure everybody else is an atheist, that they are stopping at, you want everybody around you to be an atheist for everything but religion.
Yes. You want the other people wearing seatbelts and stopping at the red light.
Yes.
You don't want them feeling like God will protect them as they run the red light.
Can you talk about brain chemistry for just a couple minutes here with some of the different neurotransmitters? One point I like to make is that science does its best to take everything out of the black box, and we've learned so much about how the brain works and transmits, with dopamine and epinephrine and all these things that have been co-opted by religion.
Well, I think one of the most interesting things I found was that there really is only one true religion: song, dance, and trance. And this religion was discovered by our ancestors in Africa. We don't know when, 70, 100,000 years ago, we don't know when. But the three populations that are closest to our ancestors in the modern world, the Aborigines, the Andaman Islanders, and the Kung San, they all have the identical religion. And I think that's suggestive evidence that that was the original religion of our ancestors. And the reason for that is that song, dance, and trance are a way of galvanizing crucial neurotransmitters: serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, oxytocin, endorphins. that create all sorts of changes in our brain. We become less inner directed, we become more outer directed. Sure. If I dance with you, I bond with you. If I touch you, just putting my hand on your shoulder, since we know each other, you get a release of endorphins and oxytocin, the trust hormone. So song, dance, and trance bind us together. They supercharge our brain, they get us thinking externally, and that's the original religion.
I think you mentioned in a time of calamity, like if you hold your spouse's hand or your partner for a long time, depending how well, it really calms things, and it has a biological effect.
Research done at the University of Virginia, Jim Cohn, and look up his work on touch, and he showed that if you get a threat, your amygdala lights up if you're alone. If a stranger's holding your hand, it doesn't light up as much. If your partner is holding your hand, it lights up even less. I mean, touch has enormous impact. And again, I think it's the beauty of science. But what I think is even more interesting is that if you look at all the modern religions, they've got song and dance, they've got physical movement, they've got synchronous physical movement, which enhances trust. And you see in every modern religion echoes of that original religion of our ancestors. And my other favorite thing was, do you know why pews are in Christian churches?
Why is that?
I read it there.
Yeah. Pews are in Christian churches.
You don't want the people moving.
They were put in Christian churches in the 16th century to stop the dancing.
Oh, interesting.
Well, we are going to have to stop the dancing now and start wrapping things up.
Yeah, but there's something we need to get off our chest before we go.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, as most people are probably well aware, the secular and atheist communities were just awash with money.
Yeah, not unlike folks at K Street and Wall Street, and all those pious pilgrims, they're camped out in besides Heaven's Gate, right?
But we here at Road to Reason, we're not doing what we do out of any moral compunction or trying to better the world. We're just...
But simply, we're just because getting the God out is such a lucrative business, right?
It is, and that brings us to the esteemed Dr. Thompson.
Yeah, the celebrity.
World renowned.
And the rather distasteful reply he gave when we first contacted him.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is going to be a little embarrassing for you, but...
Grievances got to be aired.
Right. Did you dredge up that email that he had sent me?
Yeah. Is this the one?
Looks
is that yours?
We're running out of time. Maybe you can read that real quickly there.
Oh, God, this is my email.
Yeah.
Dear Larry and Rob, appear on your piddling show. Are you guys out of your freaking minds? You defiled my book, desecrated its sacred pages. I'd sooner break bread with Satan than go slumming with such pathetic lot of trolls. Unless you make it worth my while.
Wow. Well, I did kind of deface the book a little bit with highlighting here and there. We're just about out of time. Thank you for coming. We got you these because I think that we share our affection for highlighters, pens, and so forth. Please join us next time on Road to Reason.